Good morning. Good morning, Westchester Reformed Temple and friends. Wonderful to be with you. I'm just taking the usual time to admit folks into the Zoom from the waiting room. So,
Hi, John.
Good morning.
hey guys, hi Mom, hi Dad, hi everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning, Carol. Hi, Roz. Hi, Sandy. Hi, Anne. Hello, Judy, Dottie. Arlene 2020, I think I know which Arlene that is. Linda with a Y, that's a giveaway. Stephen, I assume there's Steve Maskett. Hi, Ed. Friend, our congregant Ed Isert's with us. We've got our usuals. Good.
Good morning.
I appreciate that we've been able to maintain our cohortitude, our grouping. I realize that I don't have the correct camera hooked up, so just give me a second, and you're gonna see a whole different view of me. That's not true. Here we go. All right, let's plug that in. Better. Good morning, Debbie Bader. Good morning. Thank you for the nice note you just sent. I too am looking forward to celebrating Lily's bat mitzvah with you, so it'll be sweet. We'll start momentarily. As always, my disclaimer, the session is being recorded for the benefit of you and anyone else who would like to view the recording, wasn't able to join the class. Please use whatever appropriate discretion is required for you to feel comfortable with the fact that we are being recorded. That's been great, by the way, at kind of like toning down the number of asinine comments when I teach. Just letting people know that they're being recorded. People are much more circumspect before they raise their hands. I'm only half joking. It's wonderful. Your participation is what makes this experience so gratifying for me. So although a lot of the format is frontal, I appreciate all of the engagement with your good questions and comments. Please don't be bashful. We're going to start momentarily.
Never occurred to me to edit my my comments. Now maybe I'll think about it.
No, considering what your comments are, please don't.
Honestly, no.
It's all good. Just a reminder, whatever you say and do might be on the internet forever. So that's all. Why don't we say a blessing together? I'm going to place everybody on mute, and but please feel invited to join me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Watching all of you recite those words, it looks like you're all mouthing them along with me, is actually one of the more spiritually gratifying moments of my week, to give blessing for the simple but profound act of studying together. And today I hope we will have a complete unit of study to enjoy, which is the 9th chapter of Mishna Berakhot. The 9th and final chapter of Mishna Berakhot. So we will not rush our way through it. If we don't complete it this week, we'll finish it next week. So I don't want to jump the gun, but I do anticipate we'll make serious headway into the 9th chapter. By far my favorite chapter in Mishna Berakhot, and therefore one of my favorite chapters in all of Mishnah. You'll see that at first it looks like we're on the same topic, but by the time we get to the end of the Mishnah, we've traversed a very broad and profound landscape. So I think that you will find this a very rewarding morning of study. I frame a few remarks in writing in the outset of this week's electronic newsletter, the so-called e-blast. You may have already received it. If you don't subscribe to the weekly newsletter, it really is the best way to get all of the updated information from the temple. And given the fact that we're on a shorter timeline for planning events and running events, we can't really anticipate the months and months and months ahead like we were accustomed to. So the bulletin is not your most reliable source of information, the printed bulletin. The most reliable source of information moment to moment for what's happening at or via WRT online is either the website, wrtemple.org, or the e-newsletter, which you can sign up in the lower right-hand corner of the homepage, wrtemple.org. I highly recommend subscribing to it. It's just one email a week. It comes on Thursday mornings. This week, I have a few remarks which I offer by way of acknowledging that a lot of us have fingernails that are bitten down to the quick at this point, and that many of us, this might be the only hour and a half or 2 hour block that you are taking a break from cable news. Just be gentle on yourselves, and especially with each other. Somehow between now and tomorrow night, I've got to come up with a sermon that I will deliver to the congregation. Wish me luck. So it's, I knew that I would be when we did the preaching rotation for the clergy, I knew that I was signing up for I like to get my work done far in advance. So this is not my style to have to, pull something out, what I would consider at the last minute. But obviously the way things are going, there will be more to say, perhaps later today or tomorrow. But I realize that whatever I say has to take into account the fact that we may simply not know who the next president of the United States is going to be. So wish me luck. That's tomorrow evening at 6:15. We also will have a kind of post-election discussion forum taking place online Sunday morning at 11. I look forward to seeing you and any of your friends or family there. We do request that you register online. Thus far, we have about 100 people registered. I imagine that number will grow, but you have to look to the eBlast or the website to sign up. I also would ask that by the end of business today, if you have any questions that you would like to make sure get discussed, that you submit them to the email that's provided there, which is the office@wrtemple.org email. This is all in the weekly eBlast today, because it's my preference that we do well thought out questions that have been submitted in advance so that I have some time to think about them, rather than doing kind of a open mic style ask anything. We'll see how it goes, but I am looking forward to discussing what we know about Jewish voting patterns in this election and areas of interest specifically for the American Jewish community. So if your question falls within those parameters, I would welcome you submitting it ahead of time. So that's just a couple shout outs to some election related temple engagement. And of course, if you feel that the election has put you in a certain state of spiritual anxiety or despair, and you would like to have an opportunity to interface with somebody who cares about you and about these issues, I and the entire clergy team are at the ready to provide any kind of emotional or moral support at this time. So just know that we are here, even if here means in my living room. And with that said, let us now study some Mishnah. So I've placed on the screen the words of Mishna Berakhot, Chapter 9, Mishnah number 1, teaching number 1. So we're going to look at that together. Here we go. So back to the Sepharia translation. We've been talking about all of the different blessings that one recites as part and parcel of the life of Jewish prayer. Most of the prayers that we have examined are either fixed in the Siddur, so they are part of the statutory liturgy, and Mishna Berakhot really covers the two primary rubrics of the Siddur service, which are the Shema and the surrounding blessings, or the Shema and her blessings, and the Tefillah, or which we sometimes call the Amidah, or the Shemona Esrei, the 18 benedictions. Then we went on from there to look at the blessings that are recited in association with eating. And we spent the last 3 weeks have all been about blessings for food. This final chapter starts off appearing to be like, well, let's just make sure we catch all of the other blessings we didn't get to. We'll just kind of like dump these other blessings because Judaism is a tradition whose spirituality is expressed through the act of blessing. There's a Talmudic passage that instructs that a Jew should recite 100 blessings a day. And some Jewish communities take that more literally. Ours is a community that takes that less literally, but our liturgy is replete with brachot. How do you know you're reading a blessing? Well, generally it's a passage of text that begins with the words or ends with the words, Baruch atah Adonai. Blessed are you, Adonai. So now we're going to look at some of the kind of catch-all blessings that didn't have a home in the Siddur or at mealtime, because there are all sorts of other blessings in Jewish life, and many of these you know. Let's look at them together. Haro'eh makom shena'asuvo nisim leYisrael. So I like to start us off in the Hebrew to just normalize the experience of hearing and studying Hebrew. Haro'eh, one who sees, a makom is a place, shena'asu, from the Hebrew word oseh, like oseh shalom, where was performed. It's the passive form of the verb oseh. So shena'asu, where there were performed in that place. Nisim, we know this word, we've looked at it before. Nisim from nes, as in the nun on your dreidel for Hanukkah. Nes gadol hayasham, a nes is a miracle. Nisim are plural miracles. And if you remember the Hanukkah blessing, not the one over the candle lighting, but the next one, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asa nisim la'avoteinu. Okay, so God who performed miracles la'avoteinu for our ancestors. Bayamim hahem, at this time, in those days. Bayamim hahem means in those days. Ba'azman hazeh, at this time of year. Right, so in ancient times, at this calendar time of year, God performed miracles, she'asa nisim, so she'na'asuvo nisim, in which miracles were performed leYisrael, for Israel, for the Jewish people. So the circumstance is you're in a place where miracles were performed for Israel. Where would that be? Well, quite possibly in Modin, where the Maccabees originate, or in Jerusalem, on the site of the Western Wall or the Temple Mount, where the Maccabees rededicated their temple and the miracle of oil. I mean, we think of miracles in the land of Israel specifically as pertaining to the Hanukkah story, but conceivably there are other places on the globe where you could reasonably claim that a miracle was performed for the benefit of the Jewish people, whether that means a particular biblical war or battle, a decisive victory was wrought, or if you visit the Red Sea, perhaps you could make a claim that the splitting of the sea miracle took place there and recite the following blessing. So here's the blessing. Omer, one says, Baruch she'asa nisim la'avotenu b'makom hazeh. Blessed be the one who made miracles for our ancestors in this place. So now we have a blessing that is prompted not by an action, not by eating a food, but rather by being in a certain geographical location. The place takes on significance. The way you acknowledge the significance of that place is by blessing God. You don't bless the place. The place does not have intrinsic sanctity. The place is a prompt for the supplicant, the you of this scenario, to recite a blessing and thank God. So opportunities for this formalized way of expressing gratitude are linked now to space as well as to time. Remember that the very first question that the Mishnah asks, right? So we're going back to the very beginning, Mishna Berakhot Chapter 1. Can you see it on my screen? Did my screen just change? Okay, good. From what time may one recite the Shema in the evening? So the beginning of Mishna Berakhot, just so you see the flow here, we begin with considerations of time, and we bless according to time. But by the time we start chapter 9, we're now talking about place. So we're kind of bringing it all back to earth, literally. The next blessing. Makom shene'ekra mimenu avodah zarah, if one sees a place from which idolatry has been uprooted. Now that's tricky because they don't actually specify what place or places might be intended by this comment. So what is a place where idolatry has been uprooted? Well, the Bible is also replete with such places. There are records throughout the Hebrew Bible, in the books of Samuel and Kings and Judges and Chronicles, that describe how various pious kings, particularly Hezekiah and Josiah, made it part of their official regime policy to uproot idolatrous shrines, places of idol worship in the land of Israel or Canaan. The prophets also rail against certain places where idolatry was being practiced, and in the best circumstances, according to the perspective of the Hebrew Bible, some of those places were destroyed or converted into shrines to Yud-He Vav-He, to Yahweh, the God of the Hebrew people. So if you happen to be in such a place, presumably in the Holy Land, then you are supposed to recite the following words. Makom shene'ekra mimenu avodah zarah, a place where idolatry was uprooted. Omer, Baruch she'akar avodah zarah me'artzenu. Blessed is the one who has uprooted foreign worship from our land. I have never actually said that blessing. I probably have had occasion to say that blessing since I've traveled extensively throughout the land of Israel, including archaeological sites that give evidence of foreign worship. Because obviously the Israelites in ancient times were all mixed up with the Canaanites, who were various tribal peoples that worshipped gods other than Yahweh, other than the God of the Hebrews. Nevertheless, it just never occurred to me to say, blessed is the one who has uprooted idolatry from our land. But this is kind of the inverse blessing for blessed be the one who made miracles for our ancestors in this place. I'm going to stop the share and you can ask any questions you like about what we've looked at so far. Thoughts, questions, or comments just on Mishna Berakhot 9:1. Ivan or Judy?
Yeah, I have a question. It's kind of a general question, because we now know that all these Mishnas were really or to a large extent discussed by rabbis that had different opinions and so forth. What was particularly with people, the ordinary people who may not have spoken the language of the rabbis or the sophistication of the rabbis, and I'm assuming that Aramaic or whatever form of Hebrew was common perhaps throughout the people, because Yiddish only came into being after, let's say, the Jews from Ashkenazi, more Germanic lands got into Poland. How did they communicate to the people whose shrines they wanted to convert, for instance, from pagan to the Israel to the Jewish shrine?
So the answer is no one really knows, right? Because look, this literature was composed in Eretz Yisrael in the centuries following the destruction of the temple. The catalytic event for the composition of the Mishnah, and I've said this to you many times, it's probably the core takeaway that is required to understand the rabbinic program, or what this project of writing the Mishnah was really all about. It was a way of constituting, or I should say reconstituting, Jewish life in the wake of the cataclysmic devastation that followed the destruction of the temple, which of course definitively ended Jewish sovereignty and religious and kind of like a religious independence in Judea, which over the course of centuries had also become a Roman province, effectively stripped of all Jewish sovereignty. So one, what are the rabbis really grappling with here on the practical level, or is this merely abstract? I think is a noteworthy question. Also, did this ever get communicated? How did this get communicated to the wider population? Unfortunately, I don't know the answer to that. How much of this was meant to be an applicable discipline? I think is a good question. As I read the rest of Mishnah chapter Berakhot 9, I am inclined to believe that the larger function of this text is less about a practical guide to knowing what blessings to say in various locations, and much more a declaration of rabbinic theology. In other words, what are the rabbis really concerned about? And what we know, of course, is that the rabbis are grappling with the loss of their sovereignty and the loss of all of their cherished religious institutions. And so I think that they are looking to find ways to acknowledge that even without the temple, even without the priesthood, even without sovereignty, this land, this place, still carries a kind of spiritual importance that has to be recollected by the Jewish people. The Talmud will double down on that premise, by the way. When the Talmud comments on this Mishnah, it specifically says that this is referring to a place outside the land of Israel from which idolatry has been uprooted. And that one has to add, so the Talmud, centuries later, adds an additional line. And the line is translated something like this: just as idolatry has been removed from this place, the place where the supplicant finds him or herself, so too may it be removed from all other places, and may God turn the hearts of the idolaters to your worship. So by the time of the Talmud, another 3 to 5 centuries, 3 to 7 centuries, 3 to 6 centuries after, Mishnah is completed by like 235 CE, Common Era. Talmud is, let's say, completed by 800, give or take. So another 500-600 years down the road. By the time the Talmud is completed, diaspora is the dominant condition of Jewish life. Jews really aren't living in the Holy Land. And so the Talmud says, look, we still have to acknowledge that God is at work in Jewish history and at work in the world, and that when you encounter a place in a foreign land where Jews have managed to settle and dispel the influence of idolatry, whether that might be code for Christianity, by the way, by the time the Talmud is writing, even by the time the Mishnah is written, that idolatry, I think, is often a way of getting around Roman censorship, but they're really talking about Christians, that you still have to acknowledge that God's hand was at work in allowing Jews to thrive in foreign lands. And furthermore, it adds a prayer, so may God do this in all places, so that God's sovereignty will again be acknowledged globally. So there's kind of a hopeful, even messianic dimension to this blessing, that it's really about Jewish exile and the ongoing hope for Jewish return to the Holy Land. Don't know if it answered the question, but it's a way through the question. Dad, you have a comment, or Mom? It's usually Dad, so.
Or simply, I think that the notion that after the destruction of the temple, there was no way in which the religion could continue to be so Jerusalem-centric. And this is a way of saying it doesn't have to be particularly in Jerusalem. Look around you, there are other places as well. Since we can't all assemble for our temple rites, we've got local places where this can happen as well.
Beautiful. I think that's exactly right. But it steers clear of allowing any of those other local places to be enshrined as surrogates for Jerusalem. And that's the tightrope walk that the rabbis are on, right? That they want to make it clear that certain places, the Holy Land itself, certain places within the Holy Land, and the Sanctum Sanctorum, the Holy of Holies, Jerusalem, and within Jerusalem, the Temple Mount. There's a hierarchy of holiness in space for the Jewish people in the Jewish tradition, where the Temple Mount is highest of all, and even the side of the ancient Temple Mount that was closest to the innermost shrine of the temple, which is why the western wall is considered higher in sanctity than the southern wall, which is still intact, by the way. You can go and have a service at the southern wall of the ancient temple. It just doesn't have the same significance or attributed holiness in Judaism because it wasn't as close to the innermost shrine. And that's why, by the way, even with the Western Wall, the holiest part of the Western Wall is actually underground in the tunnels. You can see it now, and there's a group of pious women in particular who tend to daven around the clock whenever security permits them to, morning and night, at that particular spot, because they believe it is the closest to the Holy of Holies within the ancient temple that stood on the top of the Temple Mount. And given the fact that the top of the Temple Mount is controlled by the Waqf, the Islamic agency, and is restricted to Jewish pilgrims except for a few hours, a few days a week, the Temple Mount itself is not encouraged as a place of religious pilgrimage. So the closest we have to that is the Western Wall. So with all that, the sanctity of such places has to be acknowledged and preserved, but it cannot happen to the exclusion of local sites of piety, because you have to acknowledge that the Jews just don't live there. I mean, it's highly impractical to keep Jerusalem as the only place that you can have a connection to God if Jerusalem is a place devoid of Jews, right? So that's what I would call the balancing act or the tightrope walk. Steve Maskett and Barbara?
I agree with all that you guys have said about the theological aspects of this. And I've been trying to think through the connection of the two together, and it felt like the second blessing about rooting out idols was really like a reminder from the Ten Commandments about how critical the relationship with God is, and both force a connection both to God and to, in a sense, to community. Because wherever you are, I like that you added the Talmudic addition to make more sense of it, because it really connects to the community in a way of we can be of that place as well, where we are.
Yeah, and remember, by the time of the Talmud, the condition of diaspora had been kind of made real for the Jewish people over the course of 500 years post-Mishnah, right? So that's a long time to embrace diaspora as your primary condition. I get the sense that the rabbis of the Mishnah are still grappling with their status as kind of both displaced and yet in the land. Barbara, comment.
Isn't it an example that in the Talmud for Hanukkah, that little cruse of oil?
Yeah, and only in the Talmud, by the way.
Right, and only in the Talmud, that it gave the Jews something to celebrate other than a military victory in a foreign land.
Exactly. I mean, we should make it clear that long before the story of the cruse of oil was formalized in the Talmudic literature, I'm not sure. It's entirely plausible that that was a folktale that the Talmud put in writing, as opposed to something it just invented out of whole cloth. We don't know. We won't know unless we find a document corroborating that hypothesis. The point, however, is that the Hanukkah was still viewed as a miracle story. So it evolved, right? It started out as a military victory, but the hand of God is seen in that victory as early as the writing of the book of Maccabees. Now, the book of Maccabees is a book that was probably written around or close to the time that Jesus walked the earth. So pre-Mishnaic. So by the time of the Mishnah, you already have an understanding that Hanukkah is a miracle time, but the specific character of the miracle is what matters. The Talmud says the miracle was not that God wrought a military victory through the Maccabees. The miracle was the miracle of the oil and the light, a spiritual victory, which makes sense, by the way, with Hanukkah around the corner. Hanukkah is the next Jewish holiday. You still have to wait another month or so. Hanukkah is kind of not early and not late this year. It's the second week of December into the third week of December, I think. It's like the 11th through the 7th, 11th through the 18th, if I'm not mistaken. So with Hanukkah around the corner, it seems fitting for me to remind you that by the time the Talmud is written, the condition of the Jews is in diaspora. They don't have a temple anymore. They don't worship in Jerusalem. They don't have a priesthood. So if you only appreciate that the meaning of Hanukkah is this victory of the Maccabees, who restored the temple, rededicated the house of worship, kicked out all the idolaters, and restored Jews to full, monarchic sovereignty in the land and reestablished the high priesthood. Well, that's wonderful, except if you're living under the heel of Rome in the year 500, or if you're living in Babylonia in the year 500, the Hanukkah story really doesn't have much to say to you as a Jew, right? And even more, it could be viewed as dangerous by the authorities. This is a story that basically talks about armed insurrection by a bunch of religious zealots against the imperial power of the Greeks. That is a seditious message if you are the Babylonian authorities or the Roman authorities at the time. And therefore, it makes a lot of sense that the rabbis would convert the meaning of the story into a friendly little kid's tale about a cruise of oil that lasted 8 days instead of the expected 1 day. We're now living through the Hanukkah of elections.
Or even,
the election
Rabbi,
that we
even-
expected to last for 1 day is going to take 8.
or even, I was always curious as to why the Book of Maccabees is not included in our lineup.
Well, now I think you have one plausible hypothesis, because what the Book of Maccabees appears to teach is that there is a strong Jewish norm for armed insurrection against the imperial power. Even the Christians don't like the Book of Maccabees. The only Bibles that include Maccabees are Catholic Bibles, and Maccabees is relegated to the far outfield in the section called Apocrypha. Okay, we continue. Thank you for your comment, Barbara, and your question. It was a really good one. So we're going to go back now and pick up at Mishna Berakhot 9:2, because we talked a little bit about geography, and we saw that what we thought were blessings about geography are actually much deeper. They're about theology. They're about history. This is Mishna Berakhot 9:2. On witnessing comets, earthquakes, thunder, or windy storms, one says, I think the line is, there's a blessing for that. So the blessing for that is, blessed be he, or blessed be the one whose strength and might fill the world. And you really have to get it in the Hebrew. So when you see all of these things, that's the first line. You say, Omer, Baruch shekocho ugvurato malei olam. Blessed be the one whose strength, koach, that's the word koach here, kocho, his strength, God's strength, ugevurato, God's gevura, like gevurot, the second prayer of the Amidah. Blessed be the one whose strength and might, malei olam, fill the world. I have recited that prayer. It's an awesome prayer. I said it for the first time as a first-year rabbinical student on a class field trip to the Negev, where we did an overnight camping out in the wilderness in southern Israel. And it happened to be the night where Comet Hyakutake was most visible. We're going back to, I think, fall of 1995. So 25 years ago. Right around this time, by the way, today marks the 25th yard site for Yitzhak Rabin's assassination. I was in Jerusalem at the time. I lived three blocks away from the prime minister's residence. We'll say a Kaddish for Rabin later this morning and tomorrow night at services. So when you see comets, earthquakes, thunder, or windy storms, you say, blessed be the one whose strength and might fill the world. When you see mountains, hills, seas, rivers, or deserts, no less majestic, but perhaps less destructive, you say, in Hebrew, the words are, I'll just go to the Hebrew for the whole thing. Al-Heharim, so har is the Hebrew word for mountain. Al-Heharim, over mountains. V'al Hagvaot, and hills. V'al Hayamim, from Yam, which is sea or an ocean. V'al HaNeharot, rivers. V'al HaMidbarot, from Midbar, wilderness or deserts. Omer, one says, Baruch Osei Ma'aseh V'Reshit. Blessed is the one who creates creation, or blessed be the one who makes all created things. What did they say? Blessed be he who made creation. Rabbi Judah, who is often the dissenting voice in Mishnah, as you should be familiar at this point with that fact, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Judah says, Haro'eh et hayam hagadol. If you see the great sea, one says, Baruch she'asa et hayam hagadol. You say, blessed be the one who made the great sea. Bisman she'ro'eh oto lifrakim, which literally means if you see it periodically, if you see it only at intervals. So first of all, question for the group, what sea is the Great Sea? Anyone can shout.
Mediterranean.
That's the Mediterranean. So the different seas of Israel have different names. The Galilee, which is a sea, it's more like a big lake, is called the Kinneret, or Yam Kinneret. A Kinneret is from the word kinor, which is a lyre, or like a biblical harp, kind of a cross between a harp and a violin, a small instrument. The shape of the Galilee resembles a lyre, so it's called the Kinneret. The Dead Sea in Hebrew is Yam HaMelach, which literally means the salt sea. It's dead because of how much salt is in it. I'm going to be talking about the Dead Sea tomorrow night because we're reading about that territory around the Dead Sea in the story of Lot's unfortunate wife, Mrs. Lot, who turned into a pillar of salt. Well, the entire landscape down there are pillars of salt. There's one that happens to look a lot like a woman in profile, people say, so they call her Lot's wife. So the Dead Sea is the Salt Sea, and the Mediterranean is called Hayam HaGadol, the Big Sea, which makes sense. If your orientation is to Eretz Yisrael, the Mediterranean is the Big Sea. Judah says there's a special blessing for seeing the Mediterranean, but only if you see it at intervals. Because it's not special if you have an oceanfront apartment in Tel Aviv and you wake up to a view of the Mediterranean every morning, right? You don't have to say a special blessing over, I see the Great Sea. You can just wake up. But if it is not a regular occurrence, then it's much more special. And isn't that true for everything in life, right? I mean, when you see the Grand Canyon, you would say this blessing. Blessed is the one who made the works of creation, because it's special. But if you live as a park ranger in the Grand Canyon, a Jewish park ranger, Mordechai Cohen, the park ranger, does not have to get up every morning and say, blessed is God, author of creation, because he gets to see the Grand Canyon every day, and it's probably not so grand. It's just his backyard. Okay, do you follow? The idea is that some of what makes a place special is how often you are seeing it. Some of what makes an experience special, as we're going to see in a minute, is its frequency. And infrequent things often in our lives take on a characteristic of being experienced as more special or meaningful. We'll finish up this mission, and then once again, I'll open up for thoughts, comments, questions. So let me just do my screen share, sorry. So as we complete this Mishnah, for rain and for good news, so over here where my mouse is hovering, al ha-gishamim, rains, Ve'al ha-bisorot hatovot. Bisorot tovot is good tidings. Omer baruch hatov v'hametiv. Blessed is the one who is good and grants good and makes things good. Hatov v'hametiv. Ve'al shmuot ra'ot. And when you hear something bad, this may be a blessing that is familiar to any of you who have ever mourned the death of a loved one. You say, Omer baruch dayan ha'emet. Blessed is the true judge. That is the blessing that is said upon hearing the news of death in particular, and it is recited traditionally around the tearing of one's garment, or in standard reform practice, rather than tearing one's garment, we often affix a black ribbon to one's lapel, either on the right-hand side or the left, depending on your relation with the deceased. So children tear the fabric over the heart, over the left-hand side of the body. And other relations, siblings, God forbid parents, and spouses of the deceased tear on the right-hand side. But what you do when you tear is not just the act of tearing. You say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, blessed are you, eternal God, sovereign of the universe, Dayan ha'emet, the righteous judge, or the true judge. So that for both, and the key that we're going to see here, and this is the transition to the next Mishnah, is that you say there's a blessing things that are good. There's a blessing for things that are bad, but they are both blessings. You don't say, thank you, God, for the healthy birth of my grandchild. Curse you, God, that my, mother died. It doesn't work that way. You have a blessing specifically for happy occasions, and you have a blessing specifically for unhappy occasions. But they are both blessings. They are all Baruch Atah Adonai. They all are thank you, God. The impulse, of course, when you hear terrible news is to cry out, to curse, to rage. Judaism tempers that human impulse, which I think is a normal impulse, by giving you language, formalized language to say that still is framed as a thank you to God, as a bracha. And I think that that's probably the biggest takeaway here. Thoughts, comments, questions on Mishnah 9:2? Michelle. Oh, I still can't hear you for some reason. Am I the only one who can't hear? Okay, so unfortunately we
He
can't.
needs to press the mute, unmute button.
No, she did. She's unmuted and it's still not working. So it could just be that her microphone's not plugged in properly or something like that. We can try one more. There it is.
Just
Yep.
forget about you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Like a Verizon commercial. Can you hear me now?
Yep, we hear you
So I
fine.
don't know if I'm anticipating future pieces here, but you've got places to bless. We've got, miracle places. We've got, natural phenomenon places and natural phenomena. Now, what about negative natural phenomena that are awe-inspiring? For example, those tremendous forest fires.
Let's get to that. Right, if you witness, in some cases it depends on how destructive the event is to you personally, right? There is no blessing over a forest fire in California if you reside in New York. But interestingly enough, in a few moments, we're going to see that there is a blessing if your house burns down. So you would bless the forest. I think that, look, if we're looking at this as how do these prayers, what kind of attitude do these prayers cultivate in the supplicant? One of awe toward all created things is a reasonable answer to that question. So would it be wrong to recite a blessing over a massive forest fire? Hard to say. If the idea is that you are thanking God for the wonder of creation, I don't know, right? I mean, it does say earthquakes, though, because they're just so awe-inspiring. So earthquakes are a really interesting example. Also, I guess you might want to take into consideration, is the phenomenon man-made or natural? And I think that also, an earthquake, people can't create an earthquake. No, except through fracking. Well, it's complicated. Judy.
Is it possible that you're acknowledging God in everything? God is there in the fire. God is there. And in some way, just acknowledging that there's a divinity in everything. The positive, we're thanking God, we're praising God. And I think the negative, we're acknowledging.
Exactly. And I think that's the theme. I think that I'm taking Michelle's question one level further, which is there a specific blessing for destructive events? The comment on the earthquake is probably the one to go with. Let's read on a little bit further. Steve or Barbara, you also have your hand or microphone in place to ask a question.
When did the Kaddish become a prayer for the dead when there's no mention of the dead?
Much, much later. It evolves, and we're going to actually end our class today with a Kaddish, so let me hold that question until the very end, because it's relevant to what I want to say before. We're actually going to say two different Kaddishes to end our study today, so we'll come back to Barbara's question. Steve Maskett, and then my dad.
Trying to understand Rabbi Judah's point, because I understand, if you see it, I don't know whether in this context intervals is more frequently or less frequently, because the Mediterranean is probably less frequent, I guess. But is it a shorter blessing, a more specific blessing that he's suggesting? Or that if you because the other one is grander, or is it just a longer blessing? I'm not sure what he's objecting to.
Yeah, not clear. I put the text back up just to see it. I think that he's not so much objecting as he's saying, by the way, there is a specific blessing for this specific sea, which presumably in the time and place where he lived would be the most majestic and, incredible body of water that one would see in the ordinary course of events. It was the major port for the entire coastline of Israel. It was the entryway to foreign lands and civilizations in both directions. I think it was known for both its, the way in which the sea would convey both adventure and danger. And so I think it might just be a question of the size and scope of that particular body of water. And so he wants to give it its own blessing. It seems to be a minority opinion, however. The other rabbis are like, it's just, it's the same as the blessing before it. Mountains, hills, seas, rivers, or deserts, you say, blessed be the one who made creation. Judah says there's a special blessing for the Mediterranean, but it is only applicable if you don't have oceanfront property in Tel Aviv. Dad.
It seems that the Mishnah here is butting up against a major problem with an omnipotent monotheistic God.
Let's hold that.
Now you have bought into the system that we have to explain everything, not just the good stuff. We can't blame it on one of the evil gods who did this to us.
Exactly. And I think that in the context of this class, it might have been in the context of something else I was teaching lately for Melton or Torah study. I'm teaching so much these days. You'll forgive me for getting exactly what I'm teaching confused. But I did do a class recently where we talked about the perceived threat of Gnosticism. The Gnostics were a religion, philosophical tradition that basically said there are two gods. Right? There's the God of good and there's the God of evil, the God of light and the God of darkness. The most famous of the Gnostic traditions that exist today is Zoroastrianism. I happen to know a lot about Zoroastrianism because one of my college roommates is a Zoroastrian. And in their religious tradition, in their texts, they have both a God of good and a God of evil. And the idea is that you must, seek the God of good and shun the God of evil, but both have to be acknowledged for their power in the world. Monotheism, particularly the kind of radical monotheism proposed by Deutero-Isaiah, that is to say, the text of the book of Isaiah, starting in chapter 40 and going all the way to the end, chapter 66, declares a kind of monotheism that is unprecedented in previous Jewish writing. It basically says God is responsible for everything. I, God, make the sun and the moon, the good and the evil. And so the logical consequence of that kind of monotheism is that you have to reckon with evil and misfortune as no less a function of God's sovereignty than all the good stuff, right? And I think that's why, yes, I think you're right. That is exactly what the rabbis of the Mishnah are bumping up against or grappling with or simply doubling down on. They are saying, yes, exactly. The consequence of true monotheism is that you bless God for babies being born and you bless God for people dying. And let's move on because this is going to be, I think, the signature theological nut of our class today. Okay, so we'll get to it in this Mishnah. Good, Mishnah 3. One who has built a new house or bought new vessels, right? Pots and pans, appliances. You buy a new toaster. You have a blessing for that. You say, blessed be the one who has kept us alive and preserved us and brought us to this season. You know this blessing, and it says it right here. Omer Baruch Shehechianu. This is, by the way, shorthand. Remember, the Mishnah assumes a high threshold of knowledge by its readers and students. More evidence for the claim, my claim, a claim that's shared and corroborated by other scholars of Mishnah, that the Mishnah was written by rabbis for rabbis or by rabbis for rabbis in training. So it simply says, if you buy a new house, bana vayit chadash v'kana chelim harashim, or you buy new utensils, omer baruch shehechianu. I don't know the last time I said shehechianu for buying a spatula, but it appears that this text authorizes me to do so. So congratulations. If any of you have invested in new cookware during the pandemic, as many of us have, you may be overdue for a shehechianu. And if you've moved into a new house, you definitely can say shehechianu. So Baruch shehechianu, which everybody understands, that's why there's the bracket. Shehechianu is shorthand for shehechianu v'kiyamanu v'higianu lazman hazeh. Blessed is the one who has given us life, sustained us, and enabled us to reach this season. And by the way, there are many other instances where shehechianu is warranted. Shehechianu is one of those catch-all prayers that you can really say it perhaps more often than you thought you could. For the first time you do something new in a year, you can say a shehechianu. Like, oh, hey, it's our first Monopoly game of 2021. Go and say a shehechianu. You can't say it the second time you do it. Like for even mundane activities, again, the irregularity of an event makes it deserving of a special blessing. We'll talk more about regularity and irregularity in a few moments. Let's read on, because here's where things get really juicy. One who blesses over the evil as he blesses over the good, or over the good as he blesses over the evil. One who cries over the past, behold, this is a vain prayer. What are we talking about here? So I'll read it in Hebrew. Mivarech, one who blesses al hara'ah, over misfortune. Okay, ra'ah means evil, but it also means misfortune. One who blesses over misfortune, me'ein hatova, in the same way that he blesses over good things happening. Ve'al hatova, or who blesses over the good, me'ein hara'ah, in the same way as over the evil or over misfortune. And then it doesn't say more about that. So what are we actually talking about? Hatzoek lisha'avar, one who cries out over what has already passed. Harezo tefillah shav. What is going on in this prayer? Let's tackle these two ideas separately, because I speculate we might be dealing with a problematic translation here. If you'd like to propose what you think is meant by the idea of one who blesses over the evil as he blesses over the good, or who blesses over the good as he blesses over the evil, what is going on here?
Push your hand in the screen.
What's that? Judy, I think you have your hand up, or Ivan. Oh, you're on, just unmute yourself. Yep, good.
My sense is, first of all, that when all of this was created, it was all brand new. There was no previous prescription. And my sense is that it is an extraordinary act that the rabbis have hit upon, the blessing itself over so many things, and yet you don't want to trivialize blessing. And there is a tendency, I think, perhaps it's the human condition, to complain about bad things and enjoy about good things. And yet the act of blessing kind of ties you not just to what is happening, but what stands behind it.
Beautiful.
The recognition of this unique God.
Beautifully articulated, Ivan. Thank you. I want to piggyback on your comment, because I think you've really illuminated something inside the prayer itself, or inside the Mishnah. And this is consistent with at least one line of interpretation around this Mishnah. Remember, the Mishnah itself is the source of much subsequent interpretive literature, so we don't have to just stab in the dark. We could look at what does the Talmud say, what do other commentators say, what do modern commentators say on this. it seems that the consensus in the literature post-Mishnah is that the problem with this supplicant is that we'll use he, is trying to, whoops, that's the wrong one, is trying to turn something bad into something good by offering a kind of hopeful prayer around it, right? So in other words, something bad happens, and then you say the wrong blessing. You say, blessed is the one who is good and who does good for something obviously bad. Forest fires, right? It's as if you are failing to acknowledge the thing qua itself, right? The thing for what it is. It's not that we should have illusions that bad things are not in fact bad, or that good things, superstitiously, we sometimes hear good news or encounter good news and we say something superstitious like kenohara, which means ayin hara, may it be like or invoking the evil eye. You know, we don't want to acknowledge our good in Jewish superstitious tradition because God forbid it might turn bad simply by acknowledging it. And the Mishnah may be saying that's not correct practice. If you see something bad, there's a special blessing for that. It's blessed is the true judge. If you encounter something good, it's hatov v'hametiv. Blessed is the one who is good and who does good. And you can't change the outcome just by saying a different blessing. That seems to be part of what's going on here, that you have to acknowledge the thing for what it is. And good and bad are not fungible concepts here. Dad, you have a hand up.
I think that you and I have discussed, John, how offensive we find it to suggest that someone's death or the death of a child was because God wanted another angel, or God would not have done this because there's some more wonderful higher practice. To do that just destroys all distinction between what we know is good and what is bad. So we don't get into that business of, oh, God took them away for a better reason. There has to be a distinction in the way we acknowledge the good and the bad.
That's right. And I think that what they have, and if you look at it through that line of interpretation, by the way, it becomes a little bit clearer what they have to do with the next clause, which is one who cries over the past, behold, this is a vain prayer. Now you can see how it all connects, right? Because they all have to do with trying to change the outcome of what already is. Something that is bad is bad. Something that is good is good. Something that is in the past is in the past. And no matter what formula you say, you can't change that outcome. And that, I think, is the key to unlock the meaning of this part of Mishna Berakhot 9:3. That you have to accept what things are for face value and say the blessing that calls things as they are, as opposed to what you want them to be. And then the Mishnah goes on to articulate this quite specifically. How so? All right, so the Hebrew for how so, by the way, is the nice word here, ketzad, which I'm floating my mouse over, ketzad, how so? Well, let's say one has a wife who is pregnant, all right, if his wife, but the grammar here is more at if one's wife is pregnant and one says, may it be God's will that my wife bear a male child. This is a vain prayer. Why? Because even the rabbis understood it was already a done deal, right? There is no changing. You can't say that prayer once she's already pregnant. You can say a prayer prior to the outcome, right? Before you impregnate, it's not illegitimate to say, please God, may my wife bear a male. But once she's already pregnant, nothing you can say is going to change the outcome. And the rabbis seem to know that. More painfully, if one is coming home from a journey and hears a cry of distress in the town and says, may it be God's will that this is not be those, it should just be that this is not someone in my house. This also is a prayer in vain. In other words, if you are walking by your neighborhood and you hear screaming, the rabbis actually say you can't say a prayer for, may it be God's will that it's not someone I know or love. Not only is that morally problematic, perhaps, it is logically problematic because the rabbis are saying it's already happening. Your prayers are not magical incantations that can change reality. Your prayers cannot take something bad and make it good. Your prayers cannot take something good and avoid it from becoming bad just by saying a superstitious formula. Or then the formula becomes mere superstition and not prayer anymore. You cannot use your prayer to change what is already a fact on the ground. You can only use your prayer to acknowledge appropriately what the fact is. Now, this is some heady theological stuff, and we're going to pause for a moment to take any other thoughts or comments or questions, because the first half of that Mishnah is very tricky, but once you read on and see where it's going, you can see how everything connects. It's really about what function does a prayer serve? Does a prayer change the reality? And the answer seems to be no. The way the rabbis understood prayer, or brachot, blessings, is that blessings acknowledge the reality for what it is and still find a way to say thank you, God, for whatever the thing is, whether it is good or bad. There's still a way of saying thank you, God, for the bad. You just don't do it in a way with the hope, the intention that if I say the right thing, this bad thing will suddenly not be bad anymore. That's not the point of saying Baruch Dayan Ha'emet when a loved one dies. You're saying, I have to live with the what is, even though the what is extraordinarily painful and bad. And somehow I want to invoke the nearness of the divine so that I can experience what is happening through the lens of my relationship with God, and not only through the woe is me of my misfortune, in the case of bad news. Steve Maskett.
This explanation is a good one. I just wonder whether the rabbis somewhere struggle with whether bad is always bad, good is always good. Or
yeah. Well, the answer to that question is they do. And we're going to get to it in 2 Mishnahs from now. So hold tight. Trish.
I just find it kind of poignant that for bad news, there's only one thing to say: God is the judge. It's kind of like being back in Job, big time. It's like, we don't know.
Right.
And that's kind of a good thing. Just don't try to make up stories about it. Just kind of say, this is what it is.
Beautiful.
But is
Couldn't
that
have
the
said it
only thing that's said anywhere in all of this? If it's bad news, this is it?
Yeah.
Well, that's good. I like that consistency.
Yep. There's one prayer for bad news. But again, I think it's noteworthy that there is a prayer for bad news in Judaism. There's still a way to acknowledge God. Let's move on from here, Trish. That was poignant that you raised it. So thank you. And in 2 Mishnahs, we're going to come back to this theme. Again, all of these Mishnahs are connected deeply, and I promise that we'd be more in the realm of theology today than in, how to do prayers. But let's read on. One who enters into a large city, hanichnas likrach. So not just a little town, but a krach, which is a metropolis. But in biblical times, that wouldn't have been too big. One who enters a large city should say 2 prayers, one upon entering and one upon leaving. Ben Azai says 4, that should be 4 prayers, 2 on entering and 2 on leaving. He gives thanks for the past and cries out for the future. So what's going on here and how does it connect? When you are entering a city, there are 2 prayers that you say, or maybe it is 4. You say something when you enter. So achat bichnisato v'achat bitziato. One when you enter it and one when you leave it. Ben Azai comes with a slightly dissenting opinion. He agrees that you say prayers both when you enter a big city and when you leave, but it's actually 4. 2 when you enter, 2 when you leave. And they don't say specifically here what they are. The Talmud elaborates, of course. And what kind of prayers are these? Well, you give thanks once it is in the past. In other words, that's the one you say upon leaving. You say, thank you, God. And before you enter, you plead. So ek means crying out or to plead, le'atid lavo, for what is about to happen. Let me just ask you, by way of figuring out what this mission is talking about, what would be on the minds of the people? I mean, what's on the mind of a traveler upon encountering a large city? Why prayer at all? Russell, you have a hand up and maybe you'll help us unpack this as well.
Well, thank you very much. My question was arrival in a city considered to be a matter of trepidation or a matter of celebration and opportunity? Were we seeking protection and thanks for having gotten out of there alive? Or was this sort of a lech lecha concept where you're embracing sort of a new civilization, a new opportunity?
I think that it is the former. And I think I'm getting that from the context, by the way, that you would say thank you upon leaving. And they specifically use the word soek, which means to cry out, or entreaty, or pleading. So I think that the valence of the specific language around the prayers that we get from Ben Azai, or from the end of this Mishnah, is a little bit of a tell that what the rabbis are thinking about is that for a traveler to enter a large city would be done with a posture of trepidation.
Thank you.
I think that's exactly what's happening here. So if you look at this in the Talmud, the rabbis actually in Berakhot 60a, which is a Talmudic page corresponding to this part of the Mishnah, which by the way tells you something. We are in chapter 9, Mishnah 4 of Berakhot, but in the Talmud, we're already up to page 60. You know, the Talmud is just so incredibly voluminous relative to the Mishnah. The Mishnah is very, very terse and easily digestible. The Talmud is incredibly voluminous and prolix, wordy. So Berakhot 60a explains the Mishnah and gives the wording of the prayer. And some of that wording might be familiar. Have any of you ever seen a Tfilat HaDerech, a traveler's prayer? I have one on my keychain. And I also keep one in my passport wallet because, you know, there are no atheists in foxholes. Well, for me, the equivalent is I'm not an atheist on an airplane. So I always have a little traveler's prayer with me. Several years ago, I actually digitized it so that even if I left my passport wallet at home, I always have a digital copy so that I can say the traditional traveler's prayer before leaving. Honestly, I should say it when I just take a walk in the neighborhood because people are driving like maniacs these days. They still think that pandemic means that you set aside all rules of the road. It's ridiculous. But anyway, seriously, I had a flashlight out last night with Kelly and I went for a walk at about 10 o'clock and just cars were barreling down Soundview Avenue at much too high a speed. Okay, that's my PSA for the day. So Berakhot 60a gives us the wording. It says, what does one say upon entering? And this also helps at least answer Russell's question through what did the rabbis think about this. The prayer is in English, may it be your will, Adonai our God, or Adonai my God, to bring me into this city in peace. They then go on to say, when you are inside the city and ready to, thinking about leaving, you say, I thank you, Adonai my God, for bringing me to this city in peace. When you're about to leave, you say, may it be your will, Adonai my God and God of my ancestors, to bring me out of this city in peace. And once you are safely outside, one says, I thank you, Adonai my God, that you have brought me out of this city in peace. And just as you have brought me out in peace, so may you guide me in peace and support me in peace and make me proceed in peace and deliver me from the hands of all enemies and ambushers along the way. So that's clearly what's going on here. And other variations of the Tfilat HaDerech elaborate on the theme of, may I be preserved from all harm, may I not encounter any bandits along the way. So there are all sorts of, may I not meet up with any predatory animals. That's actually in there, chayot ra'ot, literally bad beasts, bad chayot, wilde chayas in Yiddish, wild animals. So all of these things are stipulated in the traditional traveler's prayer, which is based on this Mishnah. So it all starts with the conjecture that there's a prayer before you enter a city, there's a prayer after you leave a city. Ben Azai says it's actually two. May I enter in peace now that I'm here. Thank you for bringing me in peace. When I'm about to leave, thank you for allowing me to enjoy my stay in the city without anyone molesting me. Once you leave, thank you, God, for delivering me. So 4 different ways of acknowledging this experience, although I think to Russell's question, framed through the attitude of this was dangerous. Moreover, it's consistent with what we just read, right? You pray before the experience in order to set up what kind of experience you hope God will provide you. And then after you leave, you acknowledge the experience you've just had, presumably if you're still alive, as one for an occasion of gratitude. But you don't have a bad experience and then say, oh, thank you, God, for doing something good because it secretly was good. Or you don't have a good experience and then say, it's not like you're in the city being mugged by bandits and you're saying, please protect me from danger, because it's too late at that point. Okay, let's move on. Mishnah 5, this gets back to Steve Maskett's question. This is a long Mishnah, but it is also the last Mishnah in Berakhot 9. So I'm going to bring it up on screen, and congratulations, we are going to complete this today. I can feel it. It's going to take a little while. Okay, you can see that this is a fairly long passage in Hebrew, and it begins with a word that I've introduced to you before. The word is chayav. Chayav means it is obligatory. One is obligated. Chayav adam. A man is obligated livarech, to bless, al hara'ah, over the bad, kashem shehu mivarech al hatova. Here's how they translate it. One must bless God for the evil in the same way as one blesses for the good. Now, is this not contradictory to what we just read a few minutes ago? That if you experience something bad, you're supposed to say, as Trish points out, the poignancy of having one prayer for all bad things, Baruch Dayan Ha'emet, blessed is the true judge. Thank you, God, it is the way it is, and it is not because you were absent from the world that such a misfortune happened, but because that's the way things work in your world. And whatever happened, happened because it is, part of the divine will. But this seems to be a little bit different. The grammar, however, is also different. You must bless God for the evil, kashem, in the same way. Kashem literally means like or similar to shehu mivarech al hatova, the way one blesses over the good. We're going to unpack that. Here's their proof text. It's a text that you all know. The proof text is, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. From Deuteronomy 6:5, you know that line in Hebrew, ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, b'chol levavcha, u'v'chol nafshecha, u'v'chol meodecha. Well, how is that a proof text for bless God for the bad in the same way that you bless for the good? With all your heart, with your two impulses, the evil impulse as well as the good impulse. What is going on here? Let's unpack this word by word. Ve'ahavta, you shall love, et Adonai Elohecha, Adonai your God, bechol livavcha. What is the Hebrew word for heart? Anyone know?
Live.
Lev. But the word that the book of Deuteronomy uses, or the word that we know from Shema, is an unusual variation on the Hebrew word for heart. It is not lev, it is levav. See how it's a lamed with two bets? Technically, your heart should be libecha or libecha. But in this case, it uses the unusual form levavcha, a heart with two bets in it. Okay? What is this heart with two bets? The rabbis say, with your two impulses, the evil impulse as well as the good impulse. Now, you're probably going to say, but Rabbi Blake, how do you know that that's where the rabbis get this? And the answer is because I've studied a lot of Midrash, and that's how Midrash works. The rabbis say the word levavcha means that there are two impulses within the human being, one that leads you to good and one that leads you to bad, with all your soul. But both of them, by the way, the impulse that creates good in the world, the impulse that creates bad in the world, are both occasions for loving God. They're both connected to the same one God. It's what my dad described earlier as the problem of monotheism, right? The dilemma of radical monotheism is that everything comes from God, including the things that we don't want to attribute to a God who is all good. Something has to give in this scenario. Either everything does not come from God, or not everything comes from God, or God may not be all good. God may simply be all. And that's, challenging. Rabbi Harold Kushner, in his book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, takes this up at quite some length and eventually concedes that for him and his theology, you cannot have a God who is all powerful and all good. It has to be either or, because a God who is all powerful would stop children from getting leukemia and dying. Of course, my rebuttal to Kushner is that, you're going to hate this, by the way. My rebuttal is that a child getting leukemia and dying as being bad is a subjective human evaluation. Another way of putting it is that who says that God is so concerned with human affairs? And that doesn't necessarily mean that God is not good. It just means that what is as I sometimes put it differently, the universe is not calibrated to human notions of fairness, right? The notion of what is good is a subjective human evaluation. Now we're getting deep into theology. Let's go back to the text. With all your heart means with both impulses, good and bad. With all your soul means that you should love God even though God takes your soul away from you. In other words, the crux of the human condition is that we know we are going to die. And how can you love God in a world where you know that you are mortal, or even that your mortality might be imminent, that you are dying? How can you love a God who takes your life away from you? And the answer here is that, but you must. You love God for the good as well as for the bad, right? And bad, again, I would say, well, that's a subjective evaluation. The fact that we don't like the fact that we're going to die does not mean that it's not beneficial for God's plan for the universe that all things must die. And it may simply not be part of God's plan that, children specifically get leukemia, but there are some who have argued that cancer is kind of built into the fabric of biology as a shutdown mechanism for living things. One of the reasons that cancer these days is so high up on the, if you look at like the 10 most common causes of human mortality in America 100 years ago, cancer was way down on the list. So why has cancer become more and more of a cause for mortality? The answer is because we're living longer. And it simply, our longevity reveals the fact that cancer has been lurking there all along to end people's lives. At some point, your body starts manufacturing these useless cells that take over your mechanisms and shut you down. So it's like it's like an auto shut-off switch. That's one that's one possible theory around cancer, and I think that it helps our theological awareness. Anyway, you love God even though God takes your soul away from you, with all your might, with all your money. That's a conventional explanation. Rashi gets into that. That's from another midrash. But another explanation, the one that's more important for our study today, with all your might, bechol me'odecha, means whatever treatment God metes out to you, whatever experience you have in your life, you must still love God. Because there's only one. God is the everything. Or more to the point, if you really study Kabbalistic thought and Hasidic theology, as I've been studying with the Institute for Jewish Spirituality. In fact, I just had an hour earlier this morning with my Chavruta partner, Rabbi Jenny Rosen, where we studied a text by Rabbi Menachem Nachum of Chernobyl, which was published posthumously in 1798, where he says that the great mistake of human life is that we think that we are separate from God, when in fact, God is us, and with not just God lives in us, but that we are one with divinity. And that is the true meaning of Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, that we are all part of the divine unity. So this hints at that way of thinking about the implications of monotheism. Whatever God hands out to you, God is no less God, and therefore no less deserving of your praise or your bracha. Let's stop there. That's a whole chunk of very difficult material, not just intellectually, but emotionally and theologically. Judy Gross's mic is off.
Oh, no, it's on though.
Yeah, no, I mean it's off in the sense of you're on.
It's off. I'm off. I'm on, right.
You're on by being off.
Well, this is amazing because our son-in-law is Hindu. He teaches us Hindu scripture. We were discussing this last Sunday, God is a monotheistic God. God is all, God is one. You cannot separate the good things that happen with the evil. It's exactly the same thing. And even though there are various gods in Hinduism, that different personal gods, they're all manifestations of the one.
Exactly. The line in the Zohar, the chief work of Jewish mysticism or Kabbalah, is Leit atar panui mize, or panui mine. Literally, there is nothing devoid of God.
Exactly.
Leit atar panui mimenu. There is nothing, no thought, no matter, no energy, no experience, no feeling that is not God. That is the central insight of Kabbalah. It becomes the central text of Hasidism. The Besht, the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidic Judaism, takes that line, he turns it into Hebrew, and he says, and he teaches it by way of a drash, a gloss, on a line that you may know from your morning prayers, which is Melo chol haaretz kivodo. In the Kedusha prayer, the Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzevaot. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God of hosts. Melo chol haaretz kivodo. We usually translate it as the earth is filled with God's glory. The Baal Shem Tov translates it to mean the fullness of the earth, or the fullness of all creation, is the Kavod Adonai, is the presence of God. And with everything, all matter, all energy, the universe and God are synonymous with one another. There is nothing that is not God. Judy.
Just to add that when my son-in-law absolutely was quite sick, and it was 94, 95, your sermon was on the Shema. That year, your high holidays, it was the oneness of all. It was so powerful to me because I was feeling everything is one. The doctors in Orlando, the machinery that was keeping him alive, your prayers in our shul, it was such a powerful message and exemplified just what we're talking about.
Right.
If you're believing, it's all one.
Right. It's very moving to hear my own spirituality reflected back. So I just want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
It's what others refer to as a non-dualistic theology. The dualism isn't just there's a God of good and there's a God of evil. Dualism in a religious context can also refer to the idea that there's God on the one hand, and then there's everything else. Right? God is radically other from everything else, meaning creation. That is conventional within Jewish theology, by the way. Non-dualistic theology, which this Mishnah points to, but which was really articulated and elaborated most comprehensively by the Zohar, 13th century Spain, Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah, teaches the opposite, that there is no difference between God and that which is. Everything is part of the great is of the universe. And even the word Adonai, Yud He Vav He, is derived from the word being, Havaya. It's an inversion of He Vav Yud He. Yud He Vav He is the name for God. He Vav Yud He, inverting the letters, means being or existence. So God, existence, it's also the word for breathing, or the sound of breathing. All of those are vowels. So there's a lot. Anyway, when you study the mystical text, you have to just get your head wrapped around a non-dualistic orientation toward God. Michelle, Russell, and my dad, in that order, please.
Let's see if I can keep track of this. We have, and I think maybe both you and Rabbi Kushner would agree, that we have a unified creation where in fact it's physics and things and such that keep us going, that keep us in balance. They are not, it is not and mechanisms happen. And there is a logic and a process which we over time learn and dig out, but create that. And it is not, and physics, for example, is not morally positive or morally negative. That said, we also have, start with the Tanakh, a tremendous amount of ancient literature that focuses very much on teaching good versus bad. And so in fact, we have, I don't know, are those exist, whether they are reconcilable or not, I can't answer right now.
Yeah, look, the question is incredibly rich and provocative. I think that the more I'm studying the Hasidic literature, I would say as follows. That which we experience as physics or the laws of nature is usually given the word chayut in the Kabbalistic literature or the Hasidic literature, which is a Kabbalistic discipline. It's just a little bit more approachable for the common rabbi like me, who finds the Zohar incredibly intimidating. First and foremost, because it's written in Aramaic, not Hebrew, where we're writing primarily in Hebrew with a little bit of Aramaic. For the mystics of the Jewish tradition, the laws of nature are synonymous with what is called chayut, which means the life force, the flow of God in all things. And they operate the same way. They don't have a moral valence, by the way, but it's not just that God set laws for nature and then withdrew. It's that the ongoing operations of the universe are happening specifically because God is flowing through the universe, right? The same way that an atom is not like a Niels Bohr model of a fixed unit that just exists. It's actually just an electron cloud. It's constantly in motion. So there's actually some science to back up this way of thinking about how the universe works, that it's not like things are, a planet is on an orbit and it's like it's on a railroad track. It's much more like everything is a buzzing, hub of activity. And it's happening in real time and it's working because God is working through it. In the moral sphere, I think that what I'm gleaning from a lot of the texts I'm studying is that the closer a person can come to the awareness of the God within, that there's almost like an innate or an inborn sense of right and wrong that is amplified by the proper way of reading scripture, which is entirely allegorical. I mean, it's really crazy. Like when the Torah talks about this or that law, the way the Kabbalah or the Zohar tackles that passage, it just breaks it down into a million different pieces and comes out with a whole new meaning. It's wild in terms of, it's almost like the French literary philosopher Derrida, in that the meaning of a text is not actually intrinsic to what the author intended, and that you can actually break things up and reorient them. It's almost like a cubist orientation toward the thing itself. So I was reading something this morning where the Kabbalah or the literature takes the word zot, one word, which means this in Hebrew, and it says zot actually stands for Zion, which means 7, Aleph, Tav. The 7 attributes of morality in a person as expressed through the Aleph Tav, which is a stand-in for the alphabet, through the 22 letters of the alphabet. In other words, you have intrinsic attributes of the divine within you, be they strength, compassion, justice, all of these indwelling attributes that we attribute to God actually live within us, and the way in which we express them is through the 22 letters of the alphabet. It's completely mind-blowing. It is not, honor thy father and mother. Even honor thy father and mother, I imagine in the Kabbalah, in the Kabbalistic literature, will talk about the indwelling parental presence of God within, as opposed to one's biological or adoptive parents. So, got to study some more Kabbalah. Russell and then Dad.
Well, you should honor your father and mother. So
I do. I try to all the time.
There isn't a way to ask this, I'm afraid, without sounding cynical or offending absolutely everyone on the Zoom call. So please allow me to apologize in advance. But all of this makes me wonder, are we praying because we love God, or are we praying because the law tells us to? And, one would always like to think that, we're praying because it's coming from our heart, because we love God, but then we're also commanded to love God. Thou shalt love. I mean, when's the last time you were commanded to love something? And if it is not being done, so ultimately, it makes me realize that the very purpose of Mishnah may be to degrade prayer, so that it is, in fact, even if it comes from the heart, it's coming from the heart because we were commanded to do it. Is a prayer that does not come from the heart a prayer?
Well, we've tackled that question. The second question is actually the easier. I appreciate your attentiveness to the dynamic in the Mishnah about commanded love. And the rabbis get around that in Midrash and Talmud by saying that it is not love the feeling, it is love as expressed through action. And the way in which a person demonstrates that one loves God is not so much through prayer as it is through mitzvot that benefit God's creation. So how do I know I really...
I can take issue with a lot of that.
Right.
But
so, okay. Anyway, I think your point is noted. The second question, though, the one on which you ended, remind me what you just said, because I was about to agree with it completely.
I asked, is a prayer that does not come from the heart?
Yeah, well, remember that a lot of our early teaching, we have to go all the way back to the summer when we started Mishna Berakhot, chapter 1, and it's actually, I think, chapter 3, talks a lot about intention. And it says a prayer without the intention is not really a prayer. So the rabbis were aware of the inner and outer dynamics of prayer. There's the keva, which is the fixed word, and there's the kavanah, which is the intention that energizes the prayer. And I would say without both, you've missed out on the experience of prayer in a Jewish context. All right, Dad, take it away, and then we're going to finish this Mishnah.
I wanted to follow up on Judy's citation of that sermon on the oneness of things, and a simple request that you post that once again to your blog spot, Rabbi Blake.
Yeah, or what I can do is I will, before the end of class today, I'll put a link to it in the chat box of our class, and you'll be able to. I'll do it right now because I know where it is. It lives on the temple website, and it was. Do I have it here?
I find it on the website, so I don't know.
No, it might not be on the website. Okay, I'll post it and I'll make sure that we get it as a Mishnah class. I'll put it in the email to the class. It is online somewhere. Okay, moving on. Let's finish Mishnah. We'll get a little bit into the weeds, but we've done most of the deep theological stuff already. Nope, that is not the text. That was my Institute for Jewish Spirituality stuff. Okay. Here we go. So if you're looking at your screen, you should see exactly where we left off. Whatever treatment God metes out to you at the top. One should not show disrespect to the eastern gate because it is in a direct line with the Holy of Holies. So now notice where we are. It's almost as if we have boarded a time machine to Jerusalem at the time when the temple was standing. And the whole rest of this Mishnah reorients us to the ancient temple. And I think that you've got to just draw back on what we talked about in the first half of today's class on what this place meant to the rabbis in the face of the calamity that befell the Jewish people, the Jewish state, at the hands of the Romans. And that is the principal circumstance out of which Mishnah arises, responding to that calamity, right? One should not enter the Temple Mount with a staff or with shoes on or with a wallet or with dusty feet. All of these, by the way, were considered disrespectful because you're treating it like just another place or a place to do commerce. With a staff, I was never quite clear on what the problem is, especially if you need to lean on it to walk on, but let's just take it at face value. Nor should one make it a shortcut, and all the more is spitting forbidden on the Temple Mount. Right, so that would be, if all of these mild infractions are forbidden, how much the more so don't spit, not just during COVID-19, but just, it's not polite, it's rude. All of the conclusions of blessing, and don't just cut through the Temple Mount because it's the easier way to get where you're going. That is not respectful of the place and its significance. All the conclusions of blessings that were in the temple, they, meaning ancient, or the Jews that came before, would say, forever, literally as long as the world is. And for this, you have to look at the Hebrew. So this is lo yikanes lachar habayit b'maklo, don't enter with your staff, uvemina alo, or barefoot with dusty feet, or befundato, with dust on your feet, u ve'avak she'al raglav, ve'al ya'easu kapandaria, urikika mikal v'chomer. Don't spit on it, all the more so. Okay. Kol chotmei Berakhot shehayu v'mikdash. In the ancient temple, people used to conclude a blessing, hayu omrim min ha'olam, literally forever, min ha'olam. They also decreed that a person should greet one's fellow using God's name, that God's name became part of a way of talking to people. And they give a few scriptural citations here from the book of Ruth. Behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem and said to the reaper. So Boaz was the landowner, and he has been in Bethlehem. He comes back to his property and he sees the people gleaning in the field, and he says, Adonai imachem, may God be with you. And they answered him, may God bless you. So using God's name is not only for acts of prayer, it actually gets incorporated into common greetings. It also says, the Lord is with you, you valiant warrior, in Judges 6:12, before commissioning people, or just as an ordinary greeting rather. And it also says, and do not despise your mother when she grows old, which seems to be a comment about we'll talk about that. And it also says, it is time to act on behalf of the Lord, for they have violated your teaching. Rabbi Natan says this means they have violated your teaching. It is time to act on behalf of the Lord. This is a very cryptic ending. Look at it again. So we have a couple things. One, the whole bit in the beginning, we're going to go on to the next idea. One should not show, so this whole section here, sorry, I can't click on it or it will move the screen. One should not show disrespect to the Eastern Gate. So all of this is about, if you have the privilege to visit the Temple Mount, treat it respectfully. Then it goes on to say, by the way, they used to add a phrase to the end of blessings that were said in the temple. They would say, min ha'olam, for as long as the world exists, may this blessing be so. I missed a line. When the sectarians perverted their ways and said that there was only one world, they, meaning the rabbis, decreed that they should say, me'olam ve'ad olam, from forever and ever, from one end of the world to the other end of the world. So that's a really important line. What's being discussed here is a debate between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The Pharisees were a group of ancient teachers. I think of them as the proto-rabbis. They weren't necessarily called rabbi, but they existed at the time of Jesus. You know that they make a notable appearance in the Christian scriptures, in the Gospels. They are not viewed favorably in the Gospels, but from a Jewish perspective, the Pharisees were really the class of teachers of the law who become the rabbis a generation later, after the temple is destroyed in the year 70. The Pharisees are known for having had a significant debate with the Sadducees, who were the priestly loyalists of the ancient Commonwealth. Apparently, the Sadducees denied that there was a world other than this one, and the Pharisees held up the idea that there was a world to come. In other words, this is a debate about the afterlife. And the rabbis, who are, again, the direct spiritual descendants of the Pharisees, hold up the view that denying the idea of an olam haba, or a world to come, and those of you who studied with me last spring and last winter and last fall, we did a whole year of study on Jewish views of the afterlife, so some of you may have to dredge up what we talked about together. It becomes normative rabbinic thought in the first century of the Common Era, right around the same time of Jesus's crucifixion and alleged resurrection, not coincidental, that Jews were talking a lot about what happens after we die. And the dominant group of Jewish teachers affirm that there is another world after this one, in opposition to the Sadducees, the priestly loyalists who deny that such a world exists. So the rabbis are saying, so what we're doing here is, it seems to me, we're introducing a kind of messianic thread into the text. Goes on from there to say, by the way, we can invoke God's name whenever we greet another person. And it further says that when it comes to how we deal with these ancient teachings, it is not only permitted but worthy to change a practice or to adapt or adopt a new practice, that greeting another human being by using God's name is like greeting God by using God's name. It is not only permitted, but it is encouraged. So it seems that we have like this random collection at the end of general exhortations to heed the decree of the sages. This business about do not despise your mother when she grows old, to me, I think means that one should learn from one's elders and one should learn from what previous generations did. And there's this idea that follow what the rabbis are doing because they have the authority to interpret Jewish law in a way that is authoritative for the new Jewish community, whether it is on the existence of an afterlife or how we greet people. The idea is don't spurn what your teachers have to offer here. Just because people were doing it one way in the past, if the rabbis say that such and so is kosher, then that's what we should follow. And that's how the Mishnah ends. It's a strange way to end. Thoughts, comments, questions? What does this call up for you? And then we're going to say a couple of prayers to conclude our study of Brachot. Steve Maskett.
So the introduction of the Temple Mount and the Eastern Gate felt to me like the same way that Mishnah brings up the forefathers for validation, and somehow to reinforce that all of this is sort of a reconstitution of the way we have to think about life.
Beautiful. And not just the way we have to think about life, the way we think about eternity. That by participating in prayer, even by just mentioning God's name, we are making ourselves part of an eternal project. We are meriting life in the world to come, as it were. And that's why it's not uncommon for a tractate of Mishnah, which is what we've just completed, to end on a messianic note. It's no longer just about teaching law. It's about entering a kind of theological space to contemplate the eternal. What is this really all about? What have we really been doing as we've studied Brachot? It's not just about knowing how and when to say the Shema at the right time in the right way. It is much more about experiencing communion with God, with your ancestors, and with eternity. And I think in the wake of calamity, that is a noteworthy takeaway to extract from these texts. So on that note, I'd like us to conclude in two ways. First, I would like us to say a mourner's Kaddish on the 25th yahrzeit of the slain Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin. I was there at the time, and unfortunately, I think that so much of what Rabin stood for, continues to lie in ruins. But it is meaningful for me to have a community to say this Kaddish with. If you feel moved to rise, I'm going to rise. You can join me. I'm keeping you muted. And then we're going to say another Kaddish together with a special paragraph inserted. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma divrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon uvyomechon uv'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, ba'agalau v'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shemei Rabbah mevarach le'alam alamei almaya, Yiparach v'yishtabach v'yipa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitale v'yitalal, shemei dekudasha brichu, le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shalom araba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Osei shalom b'imromav hu yaseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. And now, by way of concluding our study of Mishna Berakhot, we're going to say the traditional prayer for giving thanks to God for the opportunity to study together. It's also a Kaddish, and now I get to answer Barbara's question. A Kaddish used to be simply a prayer that would divide between separate rubrics of the service. So you would do your warm-up prayers, say a Kaddish, which is, it's just a long form of thank you, God. Kaddish is a litany of praise. Do the Shema and the blessings surrounding the Shema, another Kaddish, one called a Chatzi Kaddish or a half Kaddish. Do the Amidah, another Kaddish. Do the latter part of the service, or the Torah service, another Kaddish. You could have as many as 7 Kaddishes in a single service. What ended up happening is that in most communities, there was a Kaddish reserved for orphans. The second to last Kaddish was called the Orphans Kaddish, or the Kaddish Yatom. Over much time, by around the year 1000 CE, that Kaddish had become so closely associated with orphans, with people who had lost their parents to death, that it became more broadly understood as a Kaddish for all mourners. And over the last many centuries, over the last 10 centuries, the Kaddish has definitively become associated with the act of mourning. But it's a long evolution to get to that point. But we're going to recite a Kaddish called Kaddish de Rabbanan, which literally means the teacher's Kaddish. It's a way of giving thanks for our teachers. So I today am giving thanks to you because you, my students, are my teachers, and to our community, and to all of the sages whose names we have mentioned in our Mishnah study and who have taught us. So we've participated in this incredible conversation. So there's one additional paragraph. If you would like to recite it with me, you may, or you can just listen to me recite the Kaddish de Rabbanan, the Kaddish for scholars. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, v'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayei t'chol beit Yisrael, ba'agala uv'izman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shemei Rabbah mevarach le'alam alalmei almaya, Yiparach v'yishtabach v'yipa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yitaleh v'yithalal shemei dekudesha brichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, da'amiran bi'alma v'yimru amen. Al Yisrael ve'al Rabbanan ve'al Talmidei ve'al kol Talmidei Hon ve'al kol man de'askin be'oraita, di va'atra hadein v'di bechol atar va'atar. Yehei lohon uchon shlama rabba, china v'chista v'rachamin v'chayin arichin, umizonei rivichei uforkana, min kadam avuhon di vishmaya v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim tovim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Osei shalom bimromav hu yasei shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. And the special paragraph that we've added is this one, and we say, starting here, grant abundant peace to our people and their leaders, to our teachers and their disciples, and to all who engage in the study of Torah in this land and in all other lands. May you and they be blessed by our Creator in heaven with great peace, grace, and kindness, compassion and love, and long life, abundance and deliverance. And together let us all say, Amen. Next week, we will begin Mishnah Avot, better known as Pirkei Avot. I'm looking forward to studying more Mishnah with you, but a very different kind of Mishnah. But all the skills that we've developed as a class in how to understand Mishnah and the concerns of the rabbis are on full display. I think we're going to have a fantastic time learning. Same Zoom channel, same Zoom time, 10:15 next Thursday. We'll probably know more about the direction in which our country might be heading by then. So stay strong, stay well, don't bite your nails too much. Whatever outcome you desire, may it come to pass. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.